Okay, thanks, Anna. Let's go ahead and begin. Welcome, everyone. So glad you are with us. I'd just like a special call out and thank you to those who have attended more than one of these sessions. We appreciate that more than you know, and certainly welcome to those who are attending for the first time. Cindy, Anna, and I appreciate you taking time to be part of what we're just seeing as an exciting healthcare series focused on well-being. Which will continue until October 4th, which will be our last session. So this is the 7th of 8 meetings where we have been showcasing to our community the best of the best innovations and well-being and ones that are positively impacting organizations as they focus on engagement and certainly retaining talent. So before I turn it over to our session leader, Art Dickerson, to introduce VIVIO Airrosti. We want to thank our sponsor, ADP, certainly Siegel, and obviously we say this all the time, Art, for his willingness to facilitate and moderate these discussions. He is the master. Art is one of the innovators in the well-being space. He has been instrumental in bringing forward solution providers who are unique and certainly some of the best. And Art is the president and CEO of Top Gear Strategies, has been at the forefront of innovation for over 4 decades, and his company advises on leading innovations and growth strategies. So with that, I will turn it over to Art to set the stage for our time together. Art, thanks again for doing this, and it's all yours.
Thank you, John, and you're too kind. And good morning and good afternoon to everyone on today's call. We're happy to have you here and just excited every time we have progressive employers like yourself who are interested in looking at new and innovative strategies to improve employee engagement and retention. We're going to be focusing today on some categories that fall within the well-being area. But I just want to remind folks that we've been, for the last 7 series, focusing on 3 broad areas that have a direct bearing on engagement and retention: behavioral, health, and financial. And as John has said, we've been focusing on the 2 best of the best who are positively impacting work. Today, we're going to be speaking to innovators that focus on the 2 of the highest cost categories of healthcare spend. Presenters today with VIVIO and Airrosti. Through their solutions, you're going to find out how some of the largest dollar savings are possible in a given healthcare expense category are represented by what the work that they do. And they also improve outcomes, which is a key part of that. So as they go through their sessions today, you're going to find they bring deep insights on their innovations. They're going to share how they are unique in doing so. And through this ESA format, you get that message in a completely unfiltered way. As said already, we're going to be recording today's session, and we'll send out a link via the ESA YouTube channel along with the presentation. So again, as John said, we're thankful you're here today. We know your time's valuable, and we appreciate you be part of this. We're going to continue to do this for 1 more week, and now we're going to be moving over to our presenters, which is two companies. First, if you flip to the next slide, we're going to be hearing from Pramod John, who is the CEO of VIVIO, and he's going to take us through his tremendous capabilities in the area of specialty drugs, and then also follow Dr. Chris Cato, who is the Chief Population Health Officer of Airrosti. Pramod's going to kick off the first session in just a moment, but please stick around for part 2 led by Chris. It's equally engaging and something you absolutely won't want to miss. Pramod, thank you for being here today. We're delighted to have you on the panel today, and congratulations on the progress you're making as a top innovator and getting traction with Fortune 200 firms. I remember you already received a top award from the Validation Institute, I believe, who's verified the solid value in your representations that you'll be sharing today. Flipping over to Chris. Chris, I'm sure you're equally proud of your long list of large employers where you saved 25% or more off their musculoskeletal costs. And now that you have the full range of virtual diagnostic, in-person care, and virtual follow-up, I see great things are ahead for your firm as well on the national marketplace. So Pramod, you can go ahead and share your screen. You got 15 minutes, and thereafter you have 10 minutes of Q&A. I will need to cut you off at 15 minutes sharp, so you're prepared, looks like, and you're ready to begin. Take it away.
All right. Hey, thank you. Thank you very much, Art, and thanks for ESA. Today we want to talk about outcomes and a specialty drug specifically. Just to give you an idea of how big of an issue this is. I know that we all talk about drug costs all the time, but often we don't really understand, well, where are these costs actually? And it turns out that if you look at our overall drug spend, it's really changed over the last decade. And what's happened was a lot of the generic drugs and things that we talk about all the time now account for very little of our spend. But what you see is about that small 2% there. That 2% ends up now costing over 50% of our total drug spend. And what's also interesting, you probably have seen a lot of the things around Amazon Pharmacy, Mark Cuban Drug Company, et cetera. But that whole space only now accounts for about 15% of our drug spend. So even if you gave away all of those things, that's 9 out of 10 scripts, it would probably only account for about 5% of drug spend is what it would cost us just to give it away, which is mind-boggling when you think about how few scripts actually drive most of the cost in healthcare now. So if you were to go back and ask, hey, why is this? Well, the problems start because we have a lot of misaligned incentives. And I know that most of the folks on the phone are probably people who pay for these services. You have employees, you care about wellness, you pay for, health benefits for your employees. And the assumption that we always make is that the people that we're paying are aligned around our interest of, for example, wanting a better outcome for the member who's on a drug. And when you start breaking this down, you find often that that's not necessarily the case as we often think it is. This is just a smattering of all the money that pharma manufacturers pay different parties, starting from regulators and ending with the government itself. And so there are a lot of dollars being involved in changing the way that we think about things. And by the way, it's physicians, it's medical journals, it's all sorts of things. We all have seen consumer advertising. I don't know how many of you caught this, but if you remember when the Olympics were running, there was a very popular commercial with Ryan Murphy, who was a swimmer on the US swim team. And he's talking about this new drug for migraines called Emgality. And so if you notice, one of the interesting things about this is you watch this ad, first person testimony about how, he has migraines. But then at the very end, if you notice, and it's very hard to even read, they've actually, if you look at the video, if you look at the graphic, you'll see that it's covered by the white marker, right? And on there, you see that if you look very carefully, it says, Ryan Murphy does not take Emgality, right? And here, the thing to walk away with is, they paid millions of dollars for this. They weren't poor graphics people who accidentally mixed up the color white so you can't read the does not take Emgality in the actual strips, the lane markers themselves. And so at that point, the one thing to walk away with is the people who we buy these things from, who sell us these things, don't necessarily represent the interests of the people who pay for these things. And that's not that unusual, right? That's where the term buyer beware comes from. And so even things like, we often don't question the meaning of, what does it mean for a drug to be working? For example, we always talk about drugs. Drugs are the most common medical intervention across all medical interventions, and probably the most life-changing thing in all of history. But we often don't ask the question of, what does a drug working actually mean? And so this is an example of Humira, which is the biggest selling drug in all of history. It's a drug that's been off patent for many years, and there's no generic version of it that's available in the US because AbbVie has threatened to litigate against all the generics manufacturers. So Americans represent 4% of the world's population for whom a biosimilar of this drug is not available. And so it will be as of next year, as a matter of fact, which is quite interesting when you think about the world of drug economics. But if you step back for a second and ask, hey, what does this drug do? One is we figured out or found that we often confuse terms like effectiveness and efficacy. We use efficacy a lot. Efficacy actually means, hey, what percent of the population actually got a response? It's not a definition of, well, what was that response? Was it good, or was it bad, or was it mediocre? And it doesn't answer that question at all. And so in this case, effectiveness is a term that we're thinking about when it asks the question of, hey, what does this actually do that's useful to me as a patient? And so in this case, as you can see, if you look on the top, you'll see an ACR 20, 50, 70. An ACR 20 simply means, hey, I was 20% better than when I started. And if you look at this drug in the trials, about half the population got no response at all, which means it didn't work at all. And about 75% of the population, all they got was it's slightly better than it was before. And this is a $50,000 a year biologic with side effects like lymphoma. So we're not talking about aspirin here. And so the other thing that we don't often talk about is side effects. Turns out every one of these medications has side effects. And the side effects are generally severe. And the reason why they're severe is generally because these drugs are treating conditions that are oddball conditions, let's call it that way, like cancer, very, very sort of rare on a percentage across the population issue, like cancer, for example, or rheumatology, or rheumatic diseases, et cetera, are some of the things that we commonly see. MS are common areas where we see the use of specialty drugs. And pretty much every one of them has side effects. So it's not a zero-sum game. Even if we're overpaying for a drug that doesn't work, it's that you're subjecting somebody to side effects. And when we start talking about things like well-being, it does not improve your well-being to be on a drug that does not benefit you and has negative side effects, right? That hurts your well-being is the way to think about it. And then when you think about the financial model, most of you probably who've been on the buying side have heard about things like rebates. And we have this industry that's driven in the drug industry by things like rebates. But the thing that we often don't understand is that we're the ones who are paying for the rebate. A rebate isn't money back from, if you will, the drug manufacturer. It's 100% something that is being given to us on our money that's being returned. So now all of us, because we're smart shoppers, if we went to Amazon and saw someone selling a dress for $100 and then saw the 50%, $50 mail-in rebate, we realize, oh, I have to pay $100 and I'll get $50 back. And so it's $50 for the dress. But the same dress without a rebate is only $25. But we keep thinking that I got $50 back instead of it would have only cost $25. So the whole thing makes absolutely no sense. And what we would in our normal everyday lives all look at and say, this is the dumbest thing in the world. We keep doing in the drug world, in the way drug contracts, PBM contracts, and everything else are organized. And so, the other area that we often don't take a look at for drugs is on the medical side. A lot of the oncology drugs and other things are professionally administered, and those drugs generally show up on the medical side. So most people don't even know that there are a large amount of drug spend that is now going through their medical side, not their pharmacy side. And so when we think about sort of the pharmacy side and all the opportunity there, on the medical side, it's a world with no constraints whatsoever. These are, this is a study that was done looking at in JAMA that looked at the 61 NCI cancer centers. These are the premium, the academic medical centers and other things that we often look at. And in these cases, what they saw was the markup ranged between 1x. This is markup, not the cost. This is a 1x to 6x over the actual cost itself. And what's crazy about this, if you step back and think about it for a second, is that none of these facilities, these hospitals, had anything to do with the manufacture of this drug. They didn't make this drug. They didn't test this drug. And whether that hospital, injected you in the arm with it or somebody else would, makes absolutely no difference whether that drug's good. Right? And so it's this crazy world that we live in, right, where a lot of stuff is just marked up with no value whatsoever. And we don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to it. So, well, how do you solve this problem? Well, you solve this problem by focusing on the patient instead of the healthcare system. And that patient is one of your employees or their families. Those are the people that you're paying for. And so the thing to start with really is the question of, well, is this the right drug for me? Right? Now we all assume that it's the right drug, but nobody's really asking the question, is it? No one has data. No one's asking for the data on, prove to me that it's the right drug. And then the other question, of course, is that, well, none of us needs to overpay for these things. Why? Why should we overpay? Is it a fair price that we're paying for this? Does this outcome actually, is it a fair price that I'm paying for this? And then the most important question when we start out with these drugs and look at them and realize is that, hey, is this working for this person? Because if it's not working for my member, who cares whether this is a great drug or whatever else? Because it's not useful for the person for whom I'm paying for. And the way we think about it is that when I wake up in the morning, I don't call my neighbor to ask them whether their car's working. I mean, I really don't care. I care about whether my car runs. And, if my neighbor's car doesn't run, well, I'm not going to pay for that. And so in this world that we live today, we keep paying for things that don't work. And no one's asking, hey, why are we paying for this stuff? And it doesn't work. So I want to now switch and see if this is going to work and show you this video. Let's try this.
Some of your employees are facing serious, scary health conditions. They're counting on specialty medications to make their lives better. Unfortunately, the odds are not in their favor. Why is that? Let's start at the very beginning. A pill is born, created by a pharma company because that's what they do. They make drugs to make money. Once born, the pill makes its way to the FDA for approval, which is great, except the FDA only examines whether it's safe, not if it works. The pill is then introduced to physicians through a drug rep and to patients via advertisements. Did you know pharma companies spend twice as much on marketing as they do research and development? In the end, neither physicians nor patients receive all the information they need for a fully informed decision. And much of what they do know has been positioned to them by the same drug companies who made the pill. So the pill is prescribed. As long as the script will be covered financially, the pharmacy benefit management company will approve it and fill it. After all, they probably get a handsome rebate. And so the pill is introduced to the patient. And here's where things really go wrong. What are the odds that a pill will be the right fit for a patient? Almost always less than 50%. Why? Some drugs are experimental and haven't proven they work for anyone. Some are effective, but only for some people. Some are prescribed to address things they weren't actually designed to treat. In some cases, the drug prescribed is a lot more expensive than another drug or a generic version of the drug that would have the same clinical impact. But no one who encounters the pill on its journey has both the information and the incentive to make the very best decision for the patient. As a result, too often a pill doesn't find its perfect partner. So you have employees who are not getting better and possibly experiencing troubling side effects and missing out on a medication that would actually help them. And you're on the hook financially for this bad outcome. Meanwhile, drug companies, PBMs, and the FDA are all making more money. That's where VIVIO comes in. As a public benefit company, we answer to our calling, not shareholders. We offer an independent review of every specialty prescription so that the interests of the employers, physicians, and patients are prioritized above better bottom lines for big pharma. We first evaluate whether a drug actually works based on the existing evidence. We verify if the drug works specifically for the person who is going to take it, based on disease progression, genetics, demographics, and other important factors. Finally, we determine if there's a lower cost option available that delivers the exact same value to the patient. With our process, we dramatically increase the probability of a good match between pill and patient. As a result, you can rest easy knowing you help deliver the right medicine to the right individual at a fair cost every time.
All right, back to... So how do you do that? And our argument would be this is just generally how care should be delivered. It isn't even specific to specialty drugs, if you will. But today we've built a model in which prior authorizations are really geared towards how do I steer people towards the most profitable drug? Formularies, you probably heard all of these terms. And then at the end of the day, if you ask the question, well, who knows if this did something useful for the member or the patient? And the answer is nobody. And so, our argument is that this is the way that care should be delivered, right? Care should be delivered in that, A, we understand exactly the data behind that patient and what this medical intervention, in this case, this specialty drug, does for them. And then we ask the question of, well, did it actually do that for them? Because, a lot of these drugs have, even at a 50-50 odds, that means that 50% of the people are going to benefit, 50% won't. And if you're one of those 50% that won't, we want to figure that out as early as possible to make sure that we can get you on something that does benefit you versus being in the 50% that are on a drug potentially that has no benefit for them whatsoever. And so if you were to go back and ask, well, this is all well and good, but this sounds like it's going to be more expensive versus less expensive. And so if you were to step back for a second and ask the question of, but what does it look like? These numbers are from the, Artometrics and PSG publish an annual report on specialty drug costs. And their customers are some of the largest companies in the US. So they have the best contracts, the best consultants, and the best of everything. And their average in 2021 was about $1,295 PMPY for specialty drugs. And our customers came in at $435. And to talk about how counterintuitive this is, we have no formulary. There are no restrictions on what drug a person can have access to. It's whatever they need driven by their data. And it turns out it costs significantly less. So if you're going to pay for healthcare, then at some point, make sure that it's doing something useful. Because if you do the math on what $800 PMPY means for your organization, that's a lot of dollars that could be that you could spend on all sorts of things, like give your employees a pay raise instead of giving away money to the healthcare system. That's our solution for improved wellness for people in America.
Thank you, Pramod. I appreciate that. I had to cut you off for time reasons. I know we're starting to get some questions to come in. The first one's from Rick about what action is required and by whom to address the misaligned incentives.
Well, I mean, it starts with everybody hire somebody to help solve the problem, right? And so currently today, you've got health plans, you've got PBMs, you've got consultants who help you. It starts with hiring the right people to help you solve this problem. Because if they're not aligned around solving this problem, then it's not going to solve your problem for you. And so, I mean, a lot of it starts with the fact that today, a lot of the parties involved profit from this, sort of misaligned incentives. And it starts by hiring people who have the same incentives you do, which is around getting the right care for your members.
Yeah, I remember about the new Consolidated Appropriations Act, where it had about broker consultant compensation. It really zeroed in on all the excessive dollars that are being buried in that piece or that segment of the marketplace. But that's just one place, as you pointed out, where many dollars are being layered on. And as I remember now, you also help educate the physician, correct, around what the clinical trials. Can you talk about that a little bit, about how they actually compare in terms of efficacy? Can you talk about it a little bit?
That's and Art, that also starts with another sort of, today we have this thing about consumer-driven healthcare. And our argument is, hey, this is a consumer problem, which we educate consumers to go fight with the healthcare system. And our argument is that doesn't work. These are really complex situations. To expect a consumer to be able to go fight with their doctor behind the data for a drug trial, that makes absolutely no sense at all. And so from that perspective, we start by saying, well, the right way to solve this is with the prescriber, because it's the prescriber who's the expert, and they're the ones who are prescribing this medication. And so our model starts with saying, well, we need to educate the prescriber and help them along with basically seeing the data behind these things. Because often, as you probably know, most physicians have never read the drug trials themselves either, and they're not experts in drug trials. And so part of our model starts with, how do we help? And so in every interaction as we go through the process, most of our interaction is with the physician, trying to get them to understand the data and make a better decision, which results in the right decision for the member or the patient.
Well, I remember one example you shared with me. It was when the clinical trials were shared with the physician who had never seen the clinical trials, didn't realize that there was a 5% improvement for $40,000 more. And the physician, when faced with that information, concluded that the 5% better improvement is probably not worth $40,000 more than the $500 the plan was paying, and changed the script. Basically, they authorized, and that's happening all the time, right? I mean, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the drawbacks is not only do doctors not have necessarily all the information on the trials and are not experts on them, they also have no visibility into pricing. They don't actually know what these drugs cost. And so often they're also caught in the middle of, the prior patient was PDMA, who's got different things they tell you. And nobody really reveals what the net cost is. They generally focus on things like out of pocket for the member, which has nothing to do with the cost of the drug, as you know. And so in this case, our transparency to the market also starts with helping doctors understand, what does this stuff actually cost? And so we often doctors are happy. They look at it also and they're like, this makes no sense. Why would I pay more? Why would I pay thousands more for this drug? And so doctors also, when presented with the right information, will often, you don't have to prompt them at all. They're just as smart as we are when given a financial decision like that, to look at it and say, this makes no sense to pay thousands more for this drug.
I guess that was kind of embedded in your video. When the doctor prescribes a drug, they're usually prescribing that based on the advice of the pharmaceutical rep.
Yeah, well, Art, a funny counter story to your story which was true about, hey, doctors, when presented with the dollar amounts, will often make the right decision. When we had an example, which is a phenomenal example of talking about how the industry works, is we had an example of where we talked about a trial to a doctor and about a specific drug, and the doctor's response is, oh, wow, I need to talk to the drug rep from that for that drug. And so it was very clear that where the doctor got their information was not from the primary source data, but largely it's from drug reps. And that's the reason why that whole drug detailing and everything works, and why pharma spends so much money on it. It actually works pretty effectively in getting doctors to prescribe the drugs of choice using their methods that they use for detailing.
So how many total drugs are there in the specialty drug class? It's a limited number, right?
Yeah, I mean, of overall, there are probably about 500 to 600 drugs. And for most employers, they'll find that probably about 25 to 30 of those drugs are in the 80% of their spend range, when you start looking at sort of even from a spend perspective. Drugs like Humira, as a class, if you were to look at most large employers' spend in the US, about 40 to 50% of their spend in specialties in one category, which is inflammatory diseases, which include rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel diseases, and psoriasis are the three major categories of where that spend is today.
So looking at your last slide, maybe you can interpolate this for some gross dollars on some kind of other metric, because most of the people on this call don't think about per member costs. But if you have 1,000 employee company with an average number of family members of 2, that's 2,000 members. So 2,000 members times, and that's per year, that's per member per year, 2,000 times the delta of $1,500. Is that right? So that's,
well, it's roughly, let's say it's roughly $1,000 for simple math. So okay. It's $1,000 per employee is basically what it ends up being from a savings perspective. And remember, this isn't savings. This is money that you're overpaying. There's a difference between those two things. What we're really saying is that, look, you should be spending in 2021 or 2022 $456, right? That's a fair spend to get the return on average in this case. And if you're paying more than that, it's not that we're saving you money. It's that you're overpaying 3x, right? And it's your money that you're overpaying. And all we're doing is trying to help you make sure that you don't overpay in these cases for what you're getting out of it.
So if I'm doing the math correctly, and the projected cost next year per employee is $13,000, you just saved me 7.6% of my budget.
That's right. So it's pretty significant. And so, and again, our all these cases, our argument is that, again, we don't get paid a percentage or anything. We think those are inflationary from an economic perspective. And so our business model is strictly, we get paid the same. We don't sell anything, right? So we have no economic incentive other than the member being on a therapy that works for them. And so in this case, it's a money that all of your premiums could go down, and it's money to give back to your employees rather than the healthcare system.
Yeah, to the audience, I didn't really remind everyone, but obviously you can click the raise your hand and ask your question directly at Pramod. Also, we have the chat function. If you've got any questions in the chat, please put them there. I've been sort of filling in the time slot here because we don't have a lot of questions coming in, but hopefully by now you've sort of picked up on the tremendous savings opportunity this kind of oversight provides. And in the world of I'm reading of CEOs and trying to find ways to find more money to provide better benefits to employees because of the issues with the Great Resignation and getting employees engaged. Pramod just shared with you a significant opportunity for redirecting those dollars in a way that adds much more value for engagement and retention. So I'm going to give going once to close it out for promote. Oh, we have another question here. How do we engage with video with our current partners and brokers?
So we have customers that range from Fortune 500 on downwards, and they are customers who use the big three PBMs, a lot of the large consultants and other folks. And so in every one of those conversations, it generally starts with you as a buyer taking control and deciding that we're going to do the right thing. And we you know, while we love you and respect you, at some point, you know, we're going to decide to change the way that we're doing these things. And so it's always started with a customer who's decided to do something different. And we've got customers who use the big three, a lot of the large health plans, the big consultants, and everyone. But it's always started with the customer that said, we're going to take control of our own destiny.
So we can run in parallel basically with the PBM that's currently in place, right? And have that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm sorry. To be clear, we don't replace the PBMs. We actually carve specialty out of the health plan and the PBM, but you would retain the existing PBM and health plan. So think of it as a small delta, because it's a very small number of people. On average, it's about 1.5% of the population. So that means if you took 1,000 employees, Art, your reference before, it's 15 people in your enterprise that are on specialty drugs. And so we manage very surgically just those people. So it's very low from a disruption perspective also. It's more disruption, if you will, for the current consulting model, the current PBMs, the current health plans. They're the ones who are probably going to get more bent out of shape by what we're doing, because if we're saving that money, remember that money was going to somebody else's pocket. And those people whose pockets that money was in are not as excited about what we're doing.
Well, thank you, Pramod. We're going to have to cut it off now and move on. So, all right, I want to let Chris know you're up next.
Again, thanks a lot. Thank you, everybody.
You bet. Reminder to everybody, please let our presenters know, or us at ESA, that you are interested in engaging with them further for conversations. Their contact information will be in the materials that will be distributed later today. And I see that Chris is already getting his materials ready. Chris, you got 15 minutes as well. You know the drill. You have authorization to begin. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Art, and thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to share our solution with the group. Musculoskeletal conditions, the total cost of care of MSK. If it's not the #1 cost driver, it's definitely the #2 cost driver. And so excited to share our solution. First and foremost, Airrosti is a provider group. All of our providers are W-2 employed, either doctors of chiropractic or doctors of physical therapy. They go through a very strict vetting and hiring process to be part of the team. Once they are, we bring them on board, we train them in our clinical guidelines and our clinical pathways, and we hold them accountable to those care pathways. There's a huge amount of variability in the way that musculoskeletal conditions are managed across all disciplines, whether it's MD, DC, PT, DO. And that clinical variability leads to the escalating costs for musculoskeletal conditions. And there's also a lack of adherence to those evidence-based and clinical guidelines. Airrosti as a provider group has over 20 years of clinical experience. And we also have over 1.2 million patient-reported outcomes that I'll share with you here shortly. And so here's the report card for those 1.2 million cases. So at discharge, after a patient finishes their treatment plan with Airrosti, we ask them a couple of questions. One, we ask them, did Airrosti resolve your injury or condition, yes or no? 88.4% say, yep, it's completely resolved. We also ask patients if they would refer their friends or family members for care. 99.6% would say yes. So even though there's about 11 to 12% that's not fully resolved or not completely resolved, still scoring very highly on the patient experience, that's scoring us at that 99.6. We also ask patients if we prevented further medical care or medical services for their injury condition, and 91% say yes. So that's what the patient is saying. That's what your employees will report. Those are very consistent outcomes. But oftentimes we would get challenged, especially in the early days, on how effective is the value from a total cost of care. Is there true savings there? So what we did is we invested in Milliman Med Insight to develop a methodology to study the total cost of care of MSK. We're currently utilizing Blue Health Intelligence data. So this is Blue Cross data from the entire US. And what this is showing is when an Airrosti provider is managing a musculoskeletal case, as compared to all other provider types, MD, DC, PT, DO, there's a 43% reduction in total cost of care. And a lot of that's attributed to our ability to reduce surgical utilization by 80% and high-tech imaging by 67%. About 2 years ago, we had enough data to actually look at opioid utilization and our impact that we're having on the opioid epidemic. And so even though our providers do not prescribe medication, we are having a significant impact by reducing it by 50%. And then another key piece here, these are really soft costs, but they're hard to evaluate in terms of what is that total cost. But what Airrosti is known for is fixing injuries very quickly. We average 3.2 visits per injury or condition. And when you look at various PT or chiro lengths of care, and there are treatment plans, typically those averages around 16 visit averages, 12 visit averages. We're averaging only 3.2 visits per injury condition to get to that 99.6 and 88.4% injury resolution rate. So that reduces the amount of time that's needed to go away from work to attend these lengthy treatment plans with the chiro or the PT. And so some soft costs there, but also a significant impact on the total cost of care. But what I'm excited to share with you today is our virtual solution. So Airrosti, from an in-clinic brick and mortar standpoint, we are in 4 states: Texas, Ohio, Virginia, the state of Washington, and then Washington, D.C. But Airrosti Remote Recovery, our telemedicine solution, is now available throughout the entire U.S., so in all 50 states. I'm going to touch on our MSK triage solution towards the end, but really going to kind of focus on our virtual solution. So here's a side-by-side comparison of our clinical pathways. The tried and tested over here on the left is our 20 years of in-clinic clinical pathways. And in order to be effective in the virtual space, we knew there were 2 hurdles that we had to overcome. One is, how are we going to evaluate patients, arrive at an accurate diagnosis without being in the room with the patient? And then 2, how are we going to treat these patients? So you're probably wondering, how are you getting patients fixed very quickly, 3.2 versus traditional chiro and traditional PT? We're following the evidence, we're following the literature, and we're only utilizing manual therapy and active care exercises. I'm going to show you how we've accomplished this in the virtual space, specifically on the manual therapy piece. So in order to arrive at an accurate diagnosis and do a very thorough evaluation, what we did is we took all of our functional testing, orthopedic testing, range of motion testing, and we combined all those tests into 7 different movement screens. So depending on your specific injury or condition will determine which movement screen that you will receive. And during your first virtual visit with your Airrosti provider, he'll share that movement screen with you. So you're watching that screen on your end, and this is kind of showing the treatment aspect. During the virtual visit exam, as you go through that movement screen, our provider is going to ask the typical doctor questions. Are you noticing increase in pain, any increase in symptoms? Are you noticing weaknesses from left to right? And so even though the provider is not in the room with the patient, still able to do all the testing that's necessary and arrive at a very accurate diagnosis. So once the provider has determined your diagnosis and has determined if you meet medical necessity for conservative care, he's going to prescribe you some manual therapy and active care exercises. And we combine those together in part of the treatment model. And so these exercises are also delivered to you inside of the Airrosti Remote Recovery app, and you have them accessible there for your review and also to do during your treatment plan as prescribed by your provider. So there's active care exercises and manual therapy exercises. We also are sending the patient an Airrosti Remote Recovery kit. So these are the manual therapy tools that are needed for the treatment model. This kit shows up 48 to 72 hours after your first visit and just in time for your second visit, where the provider is going to do a unboxing with you virtually through your smartphone or through your tablet and walk through the specific tools that are going to be needed for your specific injury or condition. We have 3 kits now. This one is showing our basic low back, lower extremity kit, but we also have some specialized kits for the neck and upper shoulder, and then also an upper extremity kit that includes some of these tools, but has some additional ones that are very specific to the wrist and to the elbow. Here's kind of looking at the patient experience. So not only are you having direct communication with your prescribing provider, you are allowed unlimited virtual visits with that prescribing provider as needed. So up to 12 months for that specific injury condition. You also have unlimited text messaging with your provider. Patients are saying they really love the text messaging feature because it's like they have their doctor in their back pocket. And then another key piece to this is there's a lot of accountability, looking at, when the patient is doing their exercises, when they're logging in, and then also reaching out if we need to adjust the treatment plan as needed. Here's the side-by-side comparison for the Airrosti remote recovery solution as compared to our 1.2 million cases of in-clinic. Airrosti remote recovery has been live now for 2 years. And so you can see here, very similar outcomes, not quite as good as in-clinic, but extremely close. You'll see we're averaging 4.0 visits for Airrosti remote recovery. And we have that set at 4 because at a minimum, you will receive 4 virtual visits with the Airrosti remote recovery provider. But again, if needed, you have full access to that provider for a full 12 months. We had a third party take a look at both of these populations from an outcome standpoint, and basically is the Commonwealth Health Advisors. And it was a matched cohort study, and they concluded that the Airrosti remote recovery outcomes are equivalent to our in-clinic outcomes with a 95% confidence level. And so here's the type of outcomes and the type of results that HR directors are hearing from. And these are actual patients that we have that have said, yeah, we'd love to talk about our experience with Airrosti remote recovery. We've got a ton of these, people that were skeptical, like, hey, can this type of care really be delivered remotely from a telemedicine standpoint? There's also a lot of research out there that highlights, yes, it can be done. And so getting great outcomes, making it very convenient, and really meeting the patients and the employees where they are and delivering the care when and how they need it. And then the last couple of slides, I really want to talk about the ABCs of engagement and population health. And so we work with a ton of employers, all types, so education, universities, municipalities, manufacturing, and it can be pretty tricky in terms of engagement and attracting and retaining those populations. So, but we have some key points that we feel are very important on that type of a program. So one is access points, particularly for musculoskeletal conditions. You've got to create a campaign to where people know where to start for care, because with musculoskeletal, there's 18 different points of entry, and it's very confusing to the member. And so what our employer partners are doing is they're putting Airrosti and our triage solution as their front door and really guiding their members into that. So if you can create one clear pathway that is very effective to manage all the non-surgical cases and then coordinate care out effectively, is showing a lot of success. Another piece to that is the benefit design. So we have several employers who have significantly reduced, in some cases, eliminated copays and deductibles to financially steer their members into our triage solution and also into our clinics or to our Airrosti remote recovery. And then the communication piece is key. So I mentioned this earlier. Our footprint you'll see the blue is the brick and mortar, but access points, we can now access any employer nationally with Airrosti remote recovery. If a patient's not a candidate for virtual care and they do need in-person clinical care, we're going to coordinate care appropriately to an in-network provider. Same for a specialist, or if we identify a patient that needs primary care, we're also going to steer them that way as well. Here's the front door. So this was really, I'll give credit here to Whole Foods. They wanted a front door for all of their members to walk into and then to be able to triage them and then steer them to all of their either vendor solutions or healthcare partners. And so we created VIP chat. This is an opportunity for any member, any health plan member, to jump on a virtual call with one of our providers. They're not sure what to do. They're not sure where to go. They're not sure if they have a musculoskeletal condition. This is an opportunity to receive either a first opinion or a second opinion, and then our provider can help make a recommendation based on what the patient presents with. If anybody on the call would like to test this or drive this VIP program out, let us know. Happy to set that up for you guys. It's just a really unique way to speak with the provider at no cost to the patient or to the employer. There's some patients that maybe they're not camera ready, maybe they're camera shy. We have kind of the same program set up and from a texting feature. So it's our Text Connect, very similar to the VIP chat, except you're just communicating with the doctor through texting only. I talked about the benefit design. We've got several employers really striving to make access to Airrosti very easy and very simple and reduce any financial barriers to help financially steer those members into either our practice or into Airrosti remote recovery. And then communication, the third bullet here. creating a campaign to help drive awareness. We have some employers that do an amazing job at this, that, they say, yep, let's hammer our employees with this. Let's really, communicate this a benefit. There's one employer in particular in the Dallas-Fort Worth market. It's a municipality. Looking at their claims data, we see 62% of all of their musculoskeletal conditions that are coming to, they start with Airrosti first. And so that's the type of results that you can receive. And then just remember, every time that Airrosti provider is managing that case, there's a 43% reduction in total cost of care. So I finished up a little early. We've got 2 minutes to spare, so maybe that allows for additional questions. Art?
Yeah, that's great. So appreciate that, Chris. Want to make sure that everyone knows that please click on raise hand feature if you want to ask the question directly, or type your questions into the chat function, and we'll ask them for you, or at least as many as we can. So, you haven't talked a lot about hard numbers today. You heard already about 1,000 employees. Do you have any ballparks on what kinds of savings the Airrosti services might provide in the MSK category?
Yeah, on average, it's about $1,000 per episode.
So, and how many episodes might an employee have in a given year? Do you have any rule of thumb on that?
Yeah, so there's about a 54% incident of a musculoskeletal condition that's going to happen within a population. And then typically out of that 54%, about 30% are going to be actively seeking care.
Great. Yeah, so this is MSK, is one that is a particular hot button of mine, because of all the people who have pain in a given area are having surgery where the pain is radiating to, not the source of the pain. And the amount of dollars that are spent in this area are just, if people really knew. I had personal experience with a physician who absolutely insisted on having carpal tunnel surgery on her wrist, until she went through, the virtual program, and basically solved that with a simple exercise over about a week period. So, the cost associated with the surgery was avoided. The cost associated with the absence was avoided. Any replacement worker cost that had to fill in for critical functions was avoided. So if the general public actually knew that there is so much in the medical industry is not really motivated to solve the source of the problem, but will operate on the area that the patient feels the pain is occurring in. So I have a question here from Rick. How do MSK related expenses compare with drug related expenses in terms of the total percentage of the medical plan expense? Chris, do you have a sense on that?
Yeah, not a great sense on that. So a lot of employers, oftentimes the pharmacy benefit is within a different health plan or outside of the existing health plan. So a lot of times we don't see that, the actual that total cost. When we do have that data, if it's like a blue plan and they're utilizing a blue related carrier, or if it's all the pharmacy costs are inside there and it's tied to a diagnosis code, we can look at that and tie that into the MSK costs.
Yeah, in the situations I've been have been similar types of significant cost reductions in 3 to 5% range, Rick, in my experience. So some of that will depend upon the industry. So if you're people who are doing lifting loads, as opposed to an office worker can have obviously MSK injuries just by sitting all day long, but it's a significant amount of money, 3 to 5%. The projection I just looked at on some of the national surveys, about $13,000 an employee. So you can calculate 3 to 5% savings, and from eliminating somewhere between 25 to 50% of MSK surgeries can be significant. Any other questions on here?
Looks like Adrian does.
Pardon?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have a question, if I might, Art. I'm just curious, what is if I understand correctly, right, this would be a first step for getting treatment. What's the percent of people that reach out that you can actually treat this way versus have to direct them to maybe a physical exam? I forget the term you use, but an actual examination, a hands-on examination with the doctor.
Clinic provider. So yeah, we're seeing about 97% are being able to be seen and be treated if they have a true musculoskeletal condition. If at the upfront we've identified it's not musculoskeletal, need to see primary care, need to see a specialist. That's also very rarely happening. We're seeing that happen about 5% of the time where we need to redirect. But for the most part, about 97% are able to, to start care and finish care inside of a Airrosti remote recovery.
So
without any X-rays or MRIs.
Correct. And that mirrors exactly what we do in clinic. So we refer out for imaging about 3% of the time in clinic. And the reason is because we're spending a lot of time with the patient, evaluating them, going through all the orthopedic testing, functional testing, range of motion testing, and not relying on the imaging to provide the diagnosis. And in fact, if you look at the clinical guidelines, they state like for low back pain, you shouldn't have an MRI of the low back unless you have 6 weeks of conservative care. But oftentimes that clinical guideline is not even followed. And so instead of getting a rush to an image, you want to do a full functional orthopedic and range of motion testing to make sure. Now, of course, if there is an obvious contraindication or red flag and the patient needs an image and requires an image, then we're going to send out for one.
So you just hit on another avoided cost, right? In the scheme of things, depending on the site of the
Correct.
imaging that was being avoided. If it was at Baylor, Scott and White, it's about $3,000. If it was a freestanding imaging center, it'd be about $500, but you've avoided either of those costs with this.
And when we do refer out for imaging, it is to more of the independent, non-facility based imaging centers.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that, the whole idea of identifying structural, I'm not the expert in MSK as a practitioner, just a consultant in that area about the mechanical aspect of the orthopedic condition, and a lot of times can be diagnosed pretty precisely over the phone by a series of very disciplined questions that Airrosti has been able to develop through its practice over many, many, many years. But I think that's what's surprising to many people is that that's possible without the other ancillary testing.
And then Art, one question we usually do get from folks is, how is Airrosti remote recovery different than, like, say, a hinge or a sword on the virtual musculoskeletal space? And basically, the key differences here are, one, this is a provider group delivering telemedicine where a patient is diagnosed and prescribed by a provider. And then I say the other key piece is that it's half the price of the traditional hinges and the sword. So, they're around $1,000. Airrosti's around $500 to $600, depending on which health plan that you have. And then also the time. So we are averaging 3 to 5 weeks versus 12 to 16 weeks, depending on which program that the member enrolls in. I think too, the big differentiator there is with hinges and the swords, a member is self-diagnosing and self-enrolling versus a clinician saying, yes, you have a musculoskeletal condition, you meet medical necessity, would you like to begin care?
Yeah, I was exposed to a Container Store. It's been a few years back, Chris, but I think they reduced their MSK expenses by 50% through the Airrosti services. So I know that's not always a guarantee. It depends upon the industry and the degree of the age of the population and the other factors, but definitely worth looking into if you haven't addressed this with this kind of program. So we're out of time, but thank you, Chris. Appreciate that information and hope everyone found it very valuable in evaluating, how you can engage your employees more effectively and so forth. So we want to wrap things up. And as we close out, just want to remind everybody that, you heard about VIVIO's solution today. Better care, drugs that work, avoid unnecessary side effects, $1,000 per employee and lower costs, and more dollars for other engagement programs. And as Pramod said, possibly increasing wages, which is something that's certainly needed in the world of addressing equity across the different economic categories of the workforce. And the Airrosti solution obviously helps engagement and retention by lower costs and avoiding unnecessary surgeries with a better patient experience. And obviously what I alluded to a minute ago, less lost time and obviously a lot less pain from recovery from surgery. So we would like to remind everybody that we're going to send a link out of the YouTube channel with the presentations, and please reach out directly to the presenters via their contact information and learn more about their services. I'll throw this back to Anna and John to close us out.
Thank you, Art, and to both of our speakers. We appreciate you guys being here today and sharing with everyone. I think Art kind of talked about everything that I was going to say. So just remember, there is one more of these on October the 4th, and two very different companies are speaking, and can't wait for you guys to dial in for that. So expect the email, and you can watch the recording as well as look at all the PowerPoints, and please get in touch with these guys if you have a question. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it.